This episode was brought to you by Dollar Shave Club.
Hi, I'm Dylan, and this is Not Exactly Normal. If you're familiar with this channel, then you're probably aware of my morbid fascination with our historically negative relationship with wildlife.
I've talked about octopus wrestling, rocket cats, snail telegraphs, human-made unicorn goats, and when they used to put pigs on trial.
So it's only natural that I turn my head to one of these stranger pastimes that humans have developed: fox tossing. You may be surprised to hear this, but the face of entertainment wasn't always so filled with multiple Spider People franchises. And for rich Germans in the 17th and 18th centuries, it involved a lot more tossing of foxes. It's not a sex thing. It kinda was a sex thing.
Fox tossing, or Fuchsprellen, was a relatively popular sport played in what is now modern-day Germany during and following the 30 Years' War. It was yet another in the long line of animal blood sports.
Yet, unlike other blood sports, the entire fun of the affair came from the torture, rather than the torture and death of the animal. For fox tossing, the death of the fox was simply a byproduct of watching the panicked fox react in unexpected ways.
By the 17th century, hunting had evolved from strictly a practicality to a fun spectator's sport. And at the forefront of this development was one of its biggest fans, Johann Georg I, Elector of Saxony. He loved hunting as a spectacle, and he organized ridiculous animal battles in Dresden's central market. In these fights, he would pit oxes against bears, wolves against boars and deers, and other exciting combinations.
When the fights would end, Johann would enter the arena and award the winner a prize by stabbing it through the heart with a spear. He was a cool guy. And out of Johann's animal battles grew fox tossing.
A few weeks before the event, a game master and his staff would capture as many wild animals as they could, preferring to collect species that they considered vermin, including rats, foxes, hares, badgers, and wild cats.
They would keep the animals in enclosures, feeding them well until the day of the game. The game worked like this.
In a large field, courtyard, or garden, players would lay strips of fabric, netting, or a combination of fabric and rope along the ground. This was called the bouncing cloth. The two players, both men and women, were allowed to play, yay, progressive blood sports, would stand at the ready at opposing ends of the mundanely named bouncing cloth.
Then a fox would be released and run around in terror in this 17th century Thunderdome.
Once the fox ran over the bouncing cloth, the two players would pull the cloth tight as hard as they could, launching the fox into the air. The higher the fox went, the more points were awarded. Typically, the sport was played with many pairs competing simultaneously, so the chances that the fox were to cross a bouncing cloth were quite high. The supposed beauty of the sport, and the reason that foxes were the tosser's favorite, was that apparently, when launched into the air, foxes twist and wiggle about in a rather beautiful and particularly graceful fashion as they attempt to right themselves and land on their feet. I'd love to know how they figured that one out in the first place.
Sometimes the foxes and other animals would defend themselves by biting and mauling the spectators and players. But this was all considered the fun of the game. After all, no pain, no game. Unfortunately for the fox, it was all pain, as they would die after a few tosses.
If the game was played in a courtyard, the game master would lay down some sawdust to give the animals some padding, as a fox that died on its first toss was a huge waste of a fox. After the players had finished with the fox, the game master would release the other animals, sometimes all at once.
The ensuing chaos was reportedly rather fun.
Fox tossing was primarily a sport for the rich. It required access to many animals, mainly foxes, and often was played in royal courtyards and gardens. Though there were minor leagues, played by the less rich, in fields turned arenas using canvas barriers to keep the animals from escaping. Johann Jorg I pioneered fox tossing as a distraction from the 30 Years' War, but it would be the interest of King Leopold I, who inherited the throne after that war had ended, that really took the sport to the next level.
Leopold was a huge fan of fox tossing and made it a yearly tradition that would take place every March in a beautiful park in Vienna called the Prater.
There's a famous quote from a Swedish diplomat named Esaias Pufendorf, who wrote in his diary in 1672, quote, "The Holy Roman Emperor and the King of Germany is clubbing foxes himself and throwing sticks at the foxes once they've been tossed. And he did this with young boys and court jesters," which I thought was a little far from the gravitas a Kaiser should have.
The March tradition of fox tossing would continue to grow the popularity of the sport for decades.
Augusta II, the strong Elector of Saxony, was another big fan of the sport, and he was also incredibly strong. He could supposedly break horseshoes with his bare hands, and he used fox tossing to show off that strength. In one event, he used just a single finger to yank the bouncing cloth, pulling against two of the strongest players on the other end. Something tells me that they weren't pulling very hard.
It was during Augusta II's days that fox tossing would hit all-time highs.
In one particularly large event in Dresden, 687 foxes, 533 hares, 34 badgers, and 21 wildcats were tossed and killed. To wrap up the day's festivities, Augusta released 34 young wild boars into the crowd, quote, "to the terror of the noble ladies, among whose hoop skirts the wild boars committed great havoc."
100 years after the invention of fox tossing, the sport continued with Augusta III. And it was at this time in the court of Brunswick near Hanover that the sport began to get even weirder. And sexier.
The men began to dress up as mythological figures, hobgoblins, heroes, and of course as foxes, while the women would dress up as goddesses, queens, nymphs, and sprites. But the costume tomfoolery didn't stop there. They also dressed up the foxes. They would dress them up as politicians or other members of society that they wanted to mock.
At the closing of the games, the players would enjoy a masqueraded evening in the park, all the while forgetting the pile of dead animals left in the wake of their entertainment.
Thankfully, our relationship with animals has gotten a lot better since the days of fox tossing. And another thing we've gotten better at? Sponsored segues. Well, maybe I haven't.
So I have a confession to make. I have never actually used a manual razor. First of all, my face is really bad at growing facial hair. And second of all, I always thought it was too intimidating. There was too many things to go out and buy. And I'm a third child. So by the time I rolled around, my father had pretty much given up and he gave me an electric because it was easier for him. But Dollar Shave Club wanted to change my mind. So today, after having stepped into the shoes of an 18th century German aristocrat, I'm going to do something totally foreign. I'm going to shave with a manual razor. Let's do this. All right, let's do this thing. The first step is to wet my face and then put on the pre-shave scrub. Whoa, feels very luxurious. Ooh, my pores feel so open and exfoliated. Okay, so for the first step of the shave butter is to take a dollop. Ooh, that does not look good. I'm gonna wipe that up. It's not that kind of video. Should we try this? Whoa, look how easy that is. I feel like a full-grown boy. Do you guys like my mustache? Do I look like Tom Selleck? All right, so I think I'm getting the hang of that. So let me tell you about Dollar Shave Club. They got you covered for all of your grooming needs. Shower, oral care, and of course,
Shaving. And if you want to get the same incredibly smooth shave that I'm getting, you should try their starter set. For a limited time, new members get their first month of the Executive Razor with a tube of Dr. Carver's shave butter for only $9. After that, the restock box ships regular sized products at the regular price. Go to dollarshaveclub.com/normal to get your first starter set for just $9.
what do you guys want me to talk about next? Please let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for new episodes of Not Exactly Normal as often as I can make them. Thanks for watching.
Who's Emmanuel Razor?